Welcome to Carly Tackles a noodle board, or a stovetop cover. If anyone knows why they call it noodle boards, please put the answer in the comments below. This build, we are going to make one for a gas stove which has raised griddles. In order to achieve this, we are going to build up the side so it can rest on the outside frame of the stove instead of the griddles. If you are looking to make your own noodle board, I have project plans available on my website. Check the description for links below. The materials that I'm using for this project are 1x6 pine boards. I purchased two 8-footers. Before I start measuring, I want to cut off the end from the manufacturer. There are times where this is not square. Check out my latest upgrade. I swapped out my contractor speed square for a more detailed eye gauging bench square. Came in a set with a 7-inch and a 4-inch, even included a mechanical pencil. Product links are in the description below. I'm measuring out the first piece on the cut list. The length of this board is determined by your stove. The project plans will help you determine the length. I take the piece over to my 10-inch Bosch miter saw and cut the lines. Now this is our first piece of several, so you're going to have some options. Option 1, if you have a stop block on your miter saw, you can set it to that first piece to make it easier on these repeatable cuts. This would be my preferred method. However, if you do not have a stop block, you do have option 2, which is to take your first board, lay it over the second one, make sure the ends are perfectly lined up, and then draw the line with your pencil. Now I'm just going to double check that it was the right measurement, and it is, and you can make repeatable cuts that way. For those that are just starting out, you might appreciate this tip. It's very easy with a miter saw to go fast. However, if you can go slower and give the teeth of the saw time to work, you will get better quality results. Let's take a look at that first piece I cut fairly quickly. You can see I have tear out on the edges. Now let's check out the second piece that I cut much slower. Hardly any tear out, if any. Way better quality. Once I'm finished cutting, I lay out all my pieces. I'm going to look them over for any defects or possible knots in bad locations. And I do find one that's on the edge, so I'm going to set that aside. I don't need all 5 of these to be at their full size. I'm going to trim them down to fit the stove. This stove is a tad deeper, so I'm going to need an extra 2 inches of material to make it fit the full depth. I take it over to my table saw to trim the 2 inches for that piece. Now on the DeWalt table saw, the fence has the feature to have a flip down, and you can see that's what I'm riding the piece against. If you have narrow strips, to give your hands more room for a push block, you can flip that down and that will give you an extra 2 inches away from that blade. Now I'm moving on to the base of the noodle board. If you have a gas stove or raised griddles, you will need a base. If you have a smooth cooktop, you don't need to do this at all. But notice how it works out that I get to cut that knot off and I don't even need it. This is my 4th piece. I had to go into my other material to get enough for the base. And there I'm going to stop. I did not finish milling up that other piece of work. We'll come back to that in a little bit. 2 of the pieces that we cut for the base should be the same length as all of the previous boards, which will be the front and the back. The other 2 would be longer, so we'll need to do some extra cutting. We're going to do miter joints, which is my least favorite, I have to admit. We set the miter saw to our 45-degree angle. Now for the front and the back, they're already cut to length, so we need to be careful when cutting the 45 that we're not taking anything extra off. Now remember, this is just for stoves with raised tops. If you have a smooth cooktop surface, you do not need a base. You're going to cut both sides of the front and back piece. Now the other two pieces, the side strips that were long, you can go ahead and cut the 45 degrees on one side. Do not cut the other ones yet. We need to measure to determine the total length of the board. To make this a tad easier on yourself, so you can just flip the two boards back to back so the longest points are touching. I'm measuring out how deep I need this to be, and then I'm going to make a mark. I'm going to grab my speed square and transfer that one line all the way to both. You'll want to make sure that the points of both your pieces are lined up when you're doing this. Next, I'm going to draw out the 45. For this, it's easier with the smaller, the 4-inch eye gauging bench square. I'm separating them out, and you'll need to make sure you're doing the 45 at the correct angle. Think of like a picture frame. You're going to go in on both edges with the 45. You're not doing the parallel angles. You're going in, so they should both go in. And then I draw a little X where I want to cut to make sure that I'm on that side of the line. So I'm repeating that step with the second one. Again, make sure you are drawing the 45s inward and not parallel to each other. And then I just mark a little X. And then I want to double check that I made the measurements correctly. Measure twice, cut once. Take those pieces over to the Bosch miter saw and make the 45-degree angle cuts, making sure that my blade lands on the right side of the line in this one to give me my full length. Now I did have to switch the 45 to the other side for this piece. Notice that it's on the right hand side versus going towards the left. I mentioned earlier that miter joints are my least favorite, and that's because the glue up is a pain. To help me, I have these Rocklers 3/4 inch clampets. They're meant for 3/4 inch thick material. They also make them in 1/2 inch. I've tried a few different ways to help glue up, and there's a lot of great products out there. I don't have them all, but I do have these. So this time what I'm trying is I'm going to put 2 of the opposite corners in the clamp, non-glued, just to help hold it at the 90-degree angle while I glue up the opposite 2 corners. Applying some glue there. I'm using Type Bond 3. It's what I had. I don't think you need quite that degree for a stovetop cover, but that's what I use. And then I'm going to put these corners in the clamps. You kind of have to flip it over to push it all the way in because the clamps stick out past the material to help hold it in place. And you want to have both ends glued up before you try. If you clamp up the one, you're not going to be able to get glue into the other. So make sure you do that first. And then while I got them all in clamps, I'm going around to the other corners and just double checking. Did I move them at all? Are they still sitting right now? One's not sticking out past the other. And then very carefully, because you can over clamp, it is a real thing. I do not want to push them out. I just want to help apply a little pressure. So you do need to be careful. I also have a brad nailer that I'm just going to fire 2 nails into the sides on the 2 pieces, on the 2 corners that I glued, just to help hold it in place. And then I'm going to remove the clampets from the 2 corners that don't have any glue, and then I'm going to repeat the process. So applying some glue to the sides, and then I'll reinsert the material into these clampets. This way actually worked out really well. I've done the blue paint tape. I have 90-degree corners, but some materials, they just don't work well. This didn't do too bad. I'm going to sand it when it dries. I'm going to go through, I believe, 60 grit, then 80, then 120 for now. Next, we're going to glue up the top. I have seen use of wax paper to put over your clamp, so if glue gets falls off the boards, it doesn't mess up the tracks under your clamps. And ever since using them, I've never had that problem, which is great. For me, I'm only gonna glue up 2 pieces at a time. 2 reasons. One, I have a 13-inch planer that I would like to run them through. However, the glue squeeze out is minimal and you can easily take care of it with a scraper or a sander. But the real reason is I want to add laser engraving. And my laser engraver isn't that large in size. I don't have the extension bed. So it'd be easier for me to engrave the seine if I can do that in 2 pieces versus trying to put this huge thing under the laser engraver. These little 3-way attachment clamps, I'm still on the fence with these. I'm trying them here. I don't know if they work that well, to be honest with you. But the idea of it is when you're squeezing it in from the outsides, boards have a tendency to raise or shift. And the idea is this would be your clamping pressure down to help hold it so that a board doesn't stick out or it doesn't bow and you get that twist or bow in your wood when you're gluing it up. It wanted to move my clamp. And I don't know if it's because I'm on the trigger clamps, but when I would tighten the clamp and then push it down, I noticed that my trigger end of it would be sliding. And these clamps, if you're not careful, they'll clamp your boards at the wrong angle. And as you can see, I added a few more clamps just to be safe. While that's drying up, I'm taking some wood filler, pine natural color, to the base, and I'm just filling in those wood holes as well as any miters that might have a little bit more of a gap than I would like. I'm also scanning the piece over. I did find a knot or 2 that was kind of on the edge, and I went ahead and filled that too just to be safe. While those dry, we're going to return to that piece that I had set aside. This is going to be our top. For me, I'm just going to split this in half to use up my materials. You might have more left. I would say a minimum width, rule of thumb, be 2.5. A lot of people are going to like it a little bit wider for the look, but 2.5 will get you good for handles. If you do not have a thickness planer, you can take care of glue squeeze out with a scraper, sanding. This might be a little extreme for it, but it's super easy and I have one and really like to use it. So here's my 13-inch DeWalt planer. For the next step is sanding. I did purchase a Festool sander because my hands were still vibrating many hours after sanding with my orbital sander. This has helped a lot. I'm going to go through the grits, 80, then 120, and then 150. Once I finish sanding, I'm going to take it to my laser engraver. I have the X-Tool laser engraver. I do have a setup video coming out soon. My first regret on this project is I did not engrave deep enough, and you will watch that bite me in the butt later. Now I'm going to finish my glue up. If you didn't need to run it through a planer or do laser engraving, you could have already had this step done with the first glue up. This stove is a bit deeper than most stoves, so I have that 2-inch piece as well that I need to glue to the back side. Then I added a few clamps to hold it down. Now while that's drying, I'm taking a hand sanding block and I'm just knocking down the wood filler that I applied to the base, just lightly. You don't need a power sander to do this. Now it's time to find the right fit. The base has a front and a back, so you have a few options on what looks best, but typically one side will fit better than the others. Find it, flip it over, and apply glue to the underside. Once you're done gluing it up, flip it back over and carefully line it back up. If you can avoid spreading the glue where you don't want it, you'll be happier with that. When you feel comfortable that you have it in place, press down and then apply some clamps.
Hey everyone, just want to take a few seconds to show you our new website that launched, MacellaroMade.com. It's woodworking and wood turning made for you. When you scroll down, you're going to go right into our wood turning. We have a gallery of products that have been made on a lathe, as well as a store you can purchase some of the products. And if you want something customized, we can totally do that for you too. Click on the customize and you can fill out a special request form.
If you keep scrolling down, you come into the Carly Tackles world. We have a gallery of photos, projects that are not even available on YouTube. It's a great place to get inspiration. And remember, if I can build it, so can you. You can also take a deeper dive into Carly Tackles, and then there is the store. You can purchase products and coming soon plans right from our website.
Thank you for those few seconds and appreciate your support.
As you can see, I only applied a few clamps. Just kidding. If you have a flush trim router bit, you can make your life really easy. Again, this is just for those that have a base. What we're going to do is if we have any pieces that are sticking out past the base or vice versa, this flush trim router bit will run along the piece and remove the material. So at the end, it will be flush, hence the name. This is real speed, how fast I'm going through the router. I'm going to do this with all four sides, but I'm not going to make you watch all four sides. Then I did notice I had some sticking out the other way, so I raised the router bit and flipped the board over so I'd be running against the top. And I did this on all four sides too. We did a decent amount of sanding before we glued the top to the base, but I just wanted to take some sandpaper and maybe knock off some loose edges, just going slightly over the top, but mostly focusing on the sides. Our next step is to play with those top pieces. Now the reason we didn't cut them to length is because our top board can change its size after we took it to the router table and sanded. This is where relative measuring really comes in handy. You'll line up the board flush with the opposite end, and with a pencil or knife, draw your line. You're going to cut this board to fit the piece, not a measurement. And you're going to repeat that on the other side. And there is a small chance that left and right could be different lengths, but by doing relative measuring, you're going to cut a piece that fits. Apply some glue to the top pieces, flip them over, and apply pressure to attach it to the top. If you find that the board wants to slide a little bit, you could add some sawdust in there to help it grip. Next, we are going to add some clamps. If you'd feel more comfortable, you can wait for this to dry, or you can flip it over while the clamps are on there and we can screw the top in from the underside. Now I'm using a 3/8 inch Forstner bit just to drill a hole so that the screws will sit into the wood, especially if you don't have a base. We don't want those heads of the screws to scratch your stove, so you want to sink them in. And you could do that using a Forstner bit, a brad bit, whatever you have. Just make sure it's wide enough that the head of the screw goes into the board. Next step is totally optional. I'm using a round over router bit to curve the edges on the front. The stove is curved, so I wanted to try to help give that same look, but you might also find this beneficial on typical square stoves. With the hand sanding block, I just knock off any edges or any tear out that could have happened, smooth it over a little bit. Then I take the round over bit, and now I'm going to do the underside of the back. A lot of your stoves have a curve in the back plate, and this might help it sit better. So I'm just removing that corner with my router. I follow up with that hand sanding block again, just to smooth it all out. Here is a closer look at that wood filler that I used earlier. As I was sanding, I noticed I have a little bit of gaps in the boards between my glue lines and a little bit of tear out here or there. So I'm going back through and filling with wood filler. which also means that when this dries, I'll be sanding it once again with that hand sanding block. No need for a power tool. Now, if you catch this earlier, you could probably save yourself some repeat sanding. I did not. The chamfer router bit is probably my favorite. I seem to use it on a lot of my products. I really like just knocking off the edge, and it gives a nice look. It's a little bit more pronounced than just a simple round over. It still gives it like an edge look. I'm going to use the chamfer bit all the way around each top piece, so not just on the outsides, but on the insides too. That hand sanding block does a great job smoothing it out and knocking down any possible edges or splinters. Now for my finishing process. I'm going to use a torch and burn the material, but you can do stains, dyes, whatever you want. I was thinking that if I burned it and kind of scraped it away and picked up all the dust pieces and then finished with a food safe oil, it might be a little bit better if you dropped food on it than if you had stains and dyes, which is not food safe. Is it just me, or is there something hypnotizing about watching wood burn? It's like as I pass over it, the picture reveals itself. One thing to mention is torching gives the wood the opposite effect of applying stains. Applying stains adds water to the wood and little wood fibers raise. Well, this evaporates the water and causes the grains to stand out and be more prominent. So you might still have to sand if you want a smooth surface. To create a lighter color, like a lighter brown, versus that dark white contrast that we have now, you can use a brass bristle brush to wipe away the dark, for lack of a better word. Be careful not to push down too hard. This brush can scratch your material, especially pine. It's a soft wood and it is easily indented and scratched. After you get going for a while, you're going to want to grab a vacuum and vacuum it up. But you can kind of see here that you can have two looks with the torch. You have that dark white contrast, which is great for projects. And you can also warm it up with that brown that you're kind of seeing on the left. Even though you used a shop vac and you vacuumed it and it had a brush, you're still gonna have dust on the board. You'll probably go through a few shop rags, but I would recommend really kind of wiping it off, trying to get as much of that stuff off. I would do it enough times that if you take your hand over it, barely any dust is on there. I'm going to prep the area for an epoxy pour. I'm using Tyvek tape to go around the lettering. This is probably overkill. This is just if I do a few drops, I'm hoping it lands on the tape and not the wood so it doesn't absorb. I shouldn't be having epoxy anywhere near this tape if I do it correctly. But I'd rather be safe than sorry. When you do epoxy pours, remember it's important to have your workspace level. For my epoxy, I'm using Stone Coat Countertop Epoxy. I had some left over from my office desk build. For this one, I don't need a casting epoxy. It's very shallow, which will bite me in the butt in a little bit. First, I put in the hardener, and yes, it did pour slowly, and yes, if I would have heated it up, it probably would have been better, but I didn't. Then I follow up with the hardener. I just need a little bit, 1-to-1 ratio. This is a white glittery powder that I had, trying to get that white color, which ends up being regret number 2. I should have bought the dye instead of using the powder. It's not going to turn out the way I want. The epoxies will tell you how long they recommend you stir to combine the 2 bottles correctly. So follow your instructions on your epoxy. Next, I'm going to gently pour this in. I'm starting with the hardest things. I figured that's when I lose my most patience. I start with like that little stick, but I'm having trouble getting it in the slots. And the key with epoxy is you need to break that surface tension so it can level out fully in your space. After doing that for the one set of silverware, I then would put the epoxy in the hole with the stick, but then I had a little paintbrush and I tried to get on the inside edges of the fork, knife, and spoon and break that surface tension. That seemed to work really well. Then the letters were a lot larger, so the stick worked great for that. I just try to run it through and then smear it. I got my torch out to pop any of the bubbles. Be very careful. You don't want to over torch epoxy. It can put little burn bubbles in it and they don't come out. And then I let it cure for 2 days before I get out the big sander. This is the Rotex, and a lot of people have trouble controlling it. It's a beast. But after watching some Festool Live demonstration, I learned how to properly hold it and let it do its thing. Now you're going to see why I said I did not engrave deep enough. By the time I got the epoxy off of the outside of the noodle board, that pour died. It died. It's bad. So I have to do some fixing. Remember those raised grains I was talking about when you torch? So I'm just going through a sander, gently sanding those down, and you're going to be like, man, she removed all of her burning. Why did she do that? Doing that first time raises the grains, you can sand it down. It doesn't raise so high the next time, so it's like, when you put polyurethane on a project, after a coat or two, you do a light sanding and knock it down, and then all the other coats don't have that problem. With epoxy, in between sanding, it's really important to remove the epoxy dust. They recommend you use acetone on a cloth to go through it. And then you can like buff epoxy to a fun shimmer. So I'm trying to give it back its design. These are high grit buffing pads, and in between each one, I do the acetone process, just like you do in between your sandpapers, to try to give it some life. I'm pretty desperate at this point. Retorch it. Be careful torching near epoxy. This is why I did torching first, because now that it's cured, it will leave little burnt bubbles, and I did that on the dyed. I saw it and I was really sad. Take some acetone, remove that burn. Notice I'm not brushing. I did not sand. What you don't see on camera is I went back through with the paintbrush with the epoxy and tried my darndest to re-put it on there. This is Odie's oil. This is expensive, but it's kind of like an oil wax, which sounds great. It's 100% food safe. You need to saturate the pad first, and you're supposed to use a little bit. It goes a long way. They say when you apply it, they have a YouTube video, that you're doing your most use to saturate the pad, and the rest is on the material. But remember, I torched it. So this wood is dry. It will absorb quickly. So you might use a little bit more after using that technique. With Odie's oil, 1 hour after you apply, you buff it off. And so what you're doing is you're using a microfiber cloth, an old towel, terry cloth, and you're supposed to buff it. I don't know if I'm buffing so much as wiping here. Switch to cleaner areas of the cloth. When you're done buffing, you should be able to take your hand and wipe across, and it should be smooth. If you feel any traction, that means you didn't get it all and you gotta keep buffing. Second from last step is the handles. I'm using cabinet pulls. You can also use gate handles. I'm measuring the thickness of the top piece. By using this Craig cabinet hardware jig, it's really neat. You set it to your half thickness. So if this is 2.5 inches, my half thickness is 1 1/4. On the back side of this is like rulers on both sides, and there's arrows, and you can tighten it down in spot. And right below that are 2 silver drill guides. You can adjust these to the length of your cabinet. Whether it's millimeters or inches, they have a few stops for your most common one. This one is a 5-inch cabinet pole, so that's where I have those drill guides set. I'm taking some blue paint tape and going to try to place it in the center of the top. Now for cabinet poles, you can put them wherever you want. If you don't want them centered, you don't have to. I was doing that to make it easier. Now the blue paint tape isn't going to stick too well because we just applied that Odie's oil. It is a repellent, which is fine. I just need it to stick long enough so I can mark the paint tape versus the surface. I find my half spot here, and then with my bench square, I'm going to extend that line. This Craig cabinet jig has a little slot that you line that up to. Just got to make sure you draw your line long enough to show up. With cabinet hardware, it is 3/16 of a drill bit, and these little silver guides will help keep you perfectly straight up and down. If you have a base, you want to make sure that center of that board is in farther than that base. You don't want to be drilling through that. My base is only 3/4 inch thick, and my half spot was 1 1/4, so I did not hit the base, but you might want to pay attention to that closely. Once you have the holes drilled, you can remove the paint tape, clean up the area, and then your cabinet hardware normally comes with 2 lengths of screws, whichever one works best for you. You can pop it in from that underside and screw it in. If you do not have a base, you may want to grab a 3/8 inch Forstner bit or brad bit and drill in a little bit so that the head of that screw is submerged into that wood. You don't want to scratch your smooth cooktop. I did not do that here because I do have a base. This is for a gas stove. But if you have a smooth cooktop, I would take that time and drill in a little bit for your screw heads. Repeat the step on the other side, and you will now have handles for your noodle board, which remains one last step. To protect the stove, I'm going to apply felt strips. You can get them at a hardware store. I think I got mine at a Menards. And you don't have to do this, it's optional. But I think it will be a little bit better on the cooktops. And this is just going to sit on the outside frame. Make sure you clean that surface. I did take some rubbing alcohol, make sure there was no oil residue left over. You want them to really stick. And then you just press firmly. I did 2 on the sides, and I think I did 1 in the middle section. And then your noodle board is finished. Thanks for watching Carly Tackles a Noodle Board or a stovetop cover. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my channel, Carly Tackles DIY, Tools and Gadgets, Tips and Tricks. If you'd like to see more videos like this, make sure you hit the bell and get notifications when I release new content. To help to support the channel farther, you can check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/Carly Tackles and sign up for one of my membership levels. You get access to videos earlier than YouTube and no ads.